Yes.
When they study the cultural continuity and the history of Islam in America, why is there so little focus put on how it affected the Native American history and culture, the language, the whole thing? Such as, like in my own history, my great-great-grandmother is named Marion. She was full Cherokee Indian.
It's amazing.
In the mid-1800s, there were 4 shiploads of Turkish settlers who came.
That's amazing, yeah. This is Sister Fatima, right? Fatima Muhammad. She is pointing out the fact that when you go to the Native Americans, you've also got a story. And again, think of the Mixtec terracottas. There's no question. The Cherokees definitely have a connection. Renegades. What was a renegade in the 16th century? In the 17th century? Today, a renegade's a Jeep, right? A renegade is a person that goes against the grain, right? But a renegade in the English language, what did the word renegade mean in the 16th century and the 17th century? Farhan?
The British who converted to Islam.
They're not British. The European Christian who converted to Islam was called a renegade. In Arabic and in Turkish, he was called muhtadi. Muhtadi. Rightly guided person. In English, it's called a renegade because he reneged on his Christian faith. The renegades numbered in the hundreds of thousands. This is another part of our history. And I talk about it a little bit in Webb's book because this is also background for him. The renegades are extremely important in our history. They were builders, they were artisans, they were statesmen. And the high point of the renegades is the 16th century, the 1500s and the 1600s. In that time, Sir Walter Raleigh knew them. Captain John Smith knew them. Francis Drake knew them. And one of the priests of Spain went to Algiers in 1605, and he saw the renegades there. He lived among them for a while. There was one of the gates to Algiers was called the Gate of the Renegades. There was a renegade republic in Morocco, a renegade republic. Renegades from Holland, from Germany, from Flanders, from Poland, everywhere in Russia, and everywhere in Europe. And in any case, he mentions who the renegades were, that they're from every part of Europe, every part of Italy. And also that among the renegades of Algiers were Native Americans. Native American Indians were there in Algiers as renegades. Cotton Mather, who you know in our history in the United States, Cotton Mather in one of his books mentions the fact that in New England, in the early period of colonization, a tribe of Indians was defeated and sold into slavery. And where were they sold into slavery? The Barbary Coast. Cotton Mather mentions that because of the fact that he's talking about where did the Indians come from, and at that time, one of the beliefs was that Native Americans were the 10 tribes of Israel that had been lost. So he finds it very interesting that these Native Americans have now gone back to Libya, which is close to Egypt and close to Palestine, where they probably came from originally. That's why he mentions it. But what does that mean? It means that there were also Native Americans in the renegades, without question, by the hundreds. Now, the renegades were corsairs. That's their big thing. They were corsairs. They did lots of other things as well, but they were masters of warfare at sea. That's why Captain John Smith of Virginia, Pocahontas, remember? He was also imprisoned in Turkey, but he didn't find any Pocahontas in Turkey. But he says that John Ward and Dansker, these are two big renegades. John Ward was English. They used to sing songs about him in the pubs in London because he was so wealthy. He was a Muslim. And he lived like a king in North Africa. And John Ward was a corsair. Now, corsairs are pirates, but they were basically privateers because they always worked under the auspices of the state. Even at the end, they worked under the auspices of the state, except that in the end, when the United States went to war against the corsairs, what states were the corsairs fighting for? They were now very weak. This is the 18th century, France, Britain, and Holland. They were under the control of the French. But in any case, he says that Ward and Dansker are the people who taught the Moors to be men of war. In other words, because one of the problems the Muslims had, the Ottoman Turks had, is that they could never compete with European ships. European ships were simply too big, too powerful, too swift, and Ward and Dansker took care of that. They began to equip ships that could meet the British and the French on sea. So the important thing is that the corsairs, whether we like them or not, this may not be politically correct to talk about, they crossed the Atlantic all the time. One corsair captain crossed the Atlantic Ocean over 18 times. So again, my belief would be that the real connection between people like the Cherokee and between the Muslims is probably the renegade connection. And it's also interesting that we call them renegades often, you know. But that's just speculation.